Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our final webinar of the year at the Video People Advisory Webinar Series for 2020. I'm going to give it a minute just to see who else dials in, and then we'll be joining you live. Thanks. Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to, as I said, the last of our webinar series for the year. We're not just a little bit excited about the fact that it is the last one, which means we are on the downward stretch to Christmas, but we're also excited that we're all in the same room together, which, let's face it, this year has not necessarily been conducive to getting together as a team and being able to talk about some of these really interesting topics. So very looking forward to chatting to the People Advisory team here today about our topic for today, which is transforming your business with best practice HR operating models. So here today with you is myself, Janine Waters. I'm the partner leading our People Advisory organisation here at BDO. I have Marianne Carter joining me as our Associate Director.
Hello, everyone.
And Vanessa Vaillant, our Senior Manager.
Good morning.
So we're really excited to bring this topic to you today. Before we get into it, I'll just go through a few quick housekeeping messages. You can submit questions in the question tabs. We will try as much as possible to answer as many questions as we can during the session. Personally, I love it when you submit questions online. It certainly makes for a challenging discussion. But we'll have some ready to go anyway. The presentation slides are loaded into the webinar as a handout for you to access. As per usual with ours, they're pretty light on, so it's more about listening. So if you do need to drive the car or anything, you're not going to miss anything major. If you're experiencing technical difficulties, please click support or visit https:/support.goto.com/webinar. Thank you. That was a little.
That was really good.
Post-session, you'll be sent an email follow-up with the presentation slides, a link to the recorded session. So if for some reason you do have to drop out, you will get the rest of it, and access to our past and future webinars and our contact details. So you'll be very welcome to contact any of us after today if you have any follow-up questions you'd like to ask. Now, I'm going to pass on to Vanessa. Vanessa's going to lead us through the discussion today on what is an operating model and how do we get the best practice HR operating model for our organisations.
Thanks, Janine. Morning, everybody. It's great to be together again. I can't believe it's the final webinar. It's happened so quickly. So we thought we'd kick off the conversation this morning, just kind of setting a baseline understanding of what is an operating model from our perspective, and that will help contextualize the rest of the conversation we'll have with you this morning. So the way I think of an operating model is it's really the blueprint that connects your strategy, so where you're going and what you want to achieve, and how you'll get there. So the operational elements to deliver that strategy. And I think that there are a number of different elements that need to come together to align to the strategy. And a few of those being, your performance and measurement, your people, your governance and the organization, your processes and your technology. And what we've noticed and what tends to happen, it's quite natural that, your organization will evolve over time and you'll make changes in some of these elements. You may do an organizational restructure that is driven by something in particular, or you may automate certain processes. But the challenge is that over time, they become misaligned to the strategy and you're making changes in certain areas without having an understanding and an appreciation as to whether we're headed in the same direction. And really, in an ideal operating model, what you're looking for is alignment. That's the target we're trying to reach for. And I think with COVID, but even before that, we started to hear more and more of our clients talk about operating models without necessarily saying the words,
Yes.
but acknowledging that that's something they needed to kind of take a step back and look at before making investments into processes and technology, into people. Are you hearing that too?
Yes. So a lot of our clients do come to us because, just as you're saying, Vanessa, they'll change a system and some processes, and as they're going to implement, the people aren't aligned to it. They're second guessing why it is that they're doing these pieces of work, and what's happening is the efficiencies are dropping. There's more noise happening, and there are people feeling tired. So there's some of the telltale signs that actually we're probably misaligned in terms of where we're going and what we're doing. And so they come to us and we help them work out. And one of our first steps we do is a current state review. Is it because of the processes you put in place? Is it because of leadership? Is it because of your strategy it needs a refresh? Because when you move to look at an operating model, you want to know that you're targeting the right areas.
I think what's really the most key to all of this is operating model is a little bit jargonistic. So it's rare, although I sometimes do get a client coming in saying specifically, I want my operating model looked at. But I think what Marianne's saying is really true, is it's often, we're just seeing that things aren't working as effectively as they used to in the organisation. Or we're going through changes and we're seeing that each of these changes aren't necessarily creating the outcome that we expected it to create. And it's those sorts of things that people are getting to a point where they say, actually, we've got to stop addressing things in a piecemeal way and take that step back and see what it looks like as a whole picture. So I think if you're thinking about it and you're looking in your organisation going, oh, this resonates, for me, it's not about getting really overly complicated and having, 50-page documents detailing, where your future direction lies and how it all works together. It's really just being able to sit back and go, are all of these elements pulling in the same direction? Are all of these stacking up to get us to what it is that we're trying to achieve as our ultimate target? That's really it.
I love how you say that, Janine, because I think for those that are on the line that are smaller businesses, that the concept of an operating model may seem overly complex, or we're too small, we don't need to consider that. So when you simplify it around, is everything we do and the decisions we make pointing in the same direction, anchored on a very clear strategy of where we want to go, that it becomes a lot more digestible. Okay. So when do you kind of take that moment and take that breath to say, let's look at our operating model. Let's see if actually we're anchored on the same strategy or we're making decisions in different directions. And I think from my perspective, what I've seen in working with clients is there's so many different reasons that trigger the need to have that kind of that look. And sometimes it's, you want to go to market, you see an opportunity for a new product, or you're targeting a different customer segment. And you need to kind of pivot to have a digital platform to connect with those clients. Or a common one is cost reduction, feeling the pressures of having to do more with less resources. And I think for the HR team, that's something that many teams are experiencing at the moment in terms of what value does the HR team create for the business and at what cost. New technology needs, different processes. I think one of the triggers that I've come to appreciate, and it's customer feedback. So what are your customers saying around your business, and are they pointing you to opportunities you should take advantage of and that should help you pivot your operating model to better meet their needs? And even internally, are you hearing noise from your people? Do people have what they need to do their jobs effectively? Do they have the skills, the capabilities? Are the processes that you've introduced from an HR perspective actually delivering the efficiency, or have people implemented workarounds because the technology isn't suitable, or they don't know how to use it, or other reasons? So I think those are all triggers that you can look for. I guess the visual here is also one I quite find fascinating, because when you're in the midst of that, operational mindset and you're dealing with the day-to-day pressures as an HR leader or other, that it's really hard to see kind of the alignment, that operating model alignment to the strategy. So you really need to, it's a famous saying around getting off the dance floor and going to the balcony to have the aerial view and really understanding what's happening in the business. So what's the best way to do that if you're a leader and you're very busy, you're managing people issues, you've got your day job, you're trying to drive a strategy? How do you do that?
So there are a couple of different ways you can do it. And the first thing, as you say, is trying to get objectivity. And when you're in it, sometimes you have certain perceptions and stories that you tell yourself as to why things are. And, I've been, in the HR role, and you're getting feedback from managers that they're not happy with the way this is working. And there'll be often a narrative in your head of, oh, well, that's just Joe. Joe's always got an issue with stuff. So it's really important when you start to get to a point where you go, hang on a minute, there's enough feedback happening here that I can see that something's not working. I view there's a couple of ways that you can be objective. Of course, when you're new in a job, it's much easier to be objective. So I always think when you're going into an organisation, it's almost the way I would do my 90-day plan, is to actually have that little bit of an objective viewpoint of, let me actually understand how as a HR leader, how this operating model is working within the organisation, where is the alignment or misalignment. And I think at that point, you've probably got enough objectivity to be able to kind of work through those elements yourself and get a sense of where it is aligned or not. But let's face it, you're often in the midst of it, and having that objectivity is a little bit trickier. Obviously, that's when many organisations would use consultants like us. So we will often hear one problem being presenting itself, and we go in and start to do a review, and we never go in with the assumption of the problem that presenting is in fact the problem, because of that sometimes lack of objectivity. So we'll usually go in and do a bit of a current state review aligning to the model. Let's understand how all of these different elements are working. So having somebody else come in to do that can be powerful. That's not always appropriate in organisations. You don't always have the budget or the opportunity to do that. So another thing that I've seen work in the past is where you enable a team within the business of diverse people, small team with some diverse perspectives and thought, to actually come together and help to give you that perspective. So as a HR leader, you might look at some key emerging leaders across the business and ask them to come together and do some of the stakeholder feedback or whatever, look at some of the metrics that are going on in the organisation and help feed back to either you or the leadership team what they're seeing in terms of how their alignment exists or doesn't exist. So it's, for my mind, it's about trying to lift yourself out of the weeds and your preconceived ideas and get as much objectivity into that discussion as possible. So there's some ways. I don't know, Marianne, if you've got any other thoughts.
As we were talking, Janine, what I was thinking about, if you are to bring a team of people together within your organisation, what you want to make sure happens is that when they talk and they tell you what they found, you actually take it on board.
Absolutely.
It's so much easier when it comes internally with a particular view for you to say, no, you don't get it,
Right,
you don't understand, it's not quite like that, and then you push it to the side. But actually, a lot of the time, the people within your business can tell you what is working and what is not.
Let's face it, 9 times out of 10, the reasons why we come in and do that work is not because we find information that is completely new within the business that people didn't know. It's actually because we have the discussions with the right people who can see what's going on, but we're able to present it in a way that is a little bit removed and objective. So I agree. It takes a level of maturity as a business to be able to say we're going to take that feedback and we're going to act on it, even when every fibre in your being sits there and goes, but you don't understand this and why we did this and all of that.
Yes.
So it's around looking at that. If you've got that ability and that rigor within your business that you can view that, I think it's great. If not, getting a consultant in to help deliver that message can be helpful.
And what's interesting, during COVID, a lot of businesses flipped their models, literally overnight.
Yeah.
People were crying, they weren't sure how to reach their customers. They went digital. They started doing L&D online. Different platforms were being used. So overnight, people were using different skill sets and capabilities. Now what you want to do as a business is work out which one of these platforms and capabilities help us move forward? Which one of these are aligned to where we're going? Or is it that actually now is the time to reset? Do we need to relook at our strategy now? Have we learned new things that actually we need to be doing differently as we move forward? So as you're coming into 2021, and I can't wait for it to be touched with so much better than 2020, this is the perfect opportunity for you to grab your leadership team or your executive team and say, right, we know it all starts with our vision and our strategy. Let's start there. Let's see if we need a reset, and then let's look at the other elements that sit under it, and let's just make sure we're aligned, because we want this year to be smooth. We don't want to be adding pressure where we don't need to be. And we've learned some pretty cool stuff during these 9 months. Which one of these do we keep? Which one of these do we just embody and move forward?
Yeah, take stock. That's a great idea to do in the next couple of weeks before we all break for the holidays.
Everything's got to be done before. Let's just do that before Christmas.
Yeah, we'll book the meeting before Christmas for the earliest next week.
So that's the perfect segue, Marianne, to the next discussion we want to have. And this is an interesting one. I'm very much looking forward to the next 20 minutes together. Because it's no secret that everything is moving at a rapid pace. As you said, business have changed overnight. Things they haven't been able to do in the last 30 years, they were able to do in 48 hours, which is spectacular. People pushing the boundaries, and at the same time, everyone kind of just trying to cope with it themselves and see what, how do you get through the year? And technology certainly has played a big role in the shifts in driving some of the changes that have happened in the last year. And I guess it's interesting to think about the role that HR practitioners and HR teams will play in the future, and is the value that HR provides today the same as what it will be in the future? And I guess the first place to consider is what's the future of the workforce, because then that will help us understand what role HR plays in supporting them. So Janine, what do you think?
Well, this is really funny, and Marianne's silently laughing in the background, because Marianne and I are great at playing the opposite ends of the role in these sorts of discussions, and we had an all-out war yesterday as we debated the future of HR, and I had some, I guess I have a clear view. I've been in HR for 20 years. The idea of a future of HR where it doesn't exist, or it's completely shifted beyond what it looks like now, is probably challenging for someone like me to think of. But Marianne, I think, has some more, I think, an ability to really dramatically debate and discuss these kinds of things and go, what could it actually be if we really kind of wiped the slate clean and started again? But I think it's helpful to kind of think a little bit about the journey of HR. Because when I started it, when I finished my HSC, I don't even know if HR was a term.
It was
personnel. When you had the career book.
That was just last year, everybody.
When you had your career book in front of you, and you had the little paragraph of what stuff was. I don't think I ever would have looked at personnel management and went, oh, that's me. It was very operational. In fact, even really large organisations, and my first real HR job was in Sharp and Dome, which was a pretty significantly sized business in Australia. HR had been administration. It was actually personnel administration.
Superb administration, we would say.
Actually, I'd say it was pretty clunky, but it was really just about the life cycle management of an employee. That was really the role that HR played. And then I think a lot more thinking came into play, and the roles that we started to play in HR became, I won't say that they were really strategic at that point, but it started to lift and say, okay, we play a role beyond just the administration and making sure that your files get to payroll. And we actually start to play a role in, it was almost an employee advocate type role, and trying to manage that employee advocacy with the needs of the business and helping managers through. But again, it was pretty compliance driven. It was probably mainly employee relations type work.
Upskilling line managers to make sure they could have performance discussions appropriately, really kind of lifting the legal requirements of businesses, but trying to put a bit more feeling into it.
But it was still very much a protective role. It
Yes.
was a risk management position, really, that you came from when you
Yeah.
were in personnel and when you're starting into HR. I think what I then saw shift over time was, and I might be a little contentious here, but certainly in my experience, we got to these whole concepts of best practice processes in HR and best practice talent management, best practice performance management. And to be honest, I think we may have gone a little bit overboard in the idea that you can processize, I don't think that's a technical word, but you probably know the real one, that you can deal with the variableness of people management capability by getting a really good process and some really good forms and, and making people tick boxes and go through. So we developed great forms and lots of rigorous processes and steps. And I think at one point in Merck, we probably made you have a performance discussion every quarter, and you had to go through your objective setting. And we started to put a lot of rigor into process. And that was around trying to make sure that we were getting people aligned and developing and lifting capabilities of managers, etc. But it's still very much about processes. And then I think we kept that, but we added into that and started to look at the role of the role of managers and leaders really is so critical to an organisation. So HR stepped up another level and became really about how do you create good leadership, recognising that not all of our technical leaders necessarily have great people leadership. And I think we saw a shift start to develop, and HR did start to become more strategic, more forward thinking, more thinking around what are the talent that we need to have in the future and how do we make sure that we are able to do that. Still with a lot of process sort of coming in behind that. For me, in terms of where I see us going into the future again, I guess I'm more influenced now by the fact that the last 4 or 5 years I've been in the consulting world as opposed to the in-house HR role. But what I see is our ability as organisations to put our arms around very diverse workforces, where some of our clients may have 10,000 employees that never come into the office and maybe only once a year have any kind of real face-to-face connection with an actual manager. I feel like the role of HR in the future has to be really about understanding more about culture and how organisations develop their culture and how we deal with very diverse workforces and deal with the fact that in every industry those workforces may look very different. And I feel like we start to play more of a role in understanding that. Exactly what that looks like, though, I'm not sure I have a clear view yet.
It was interesting because earlier this week I had a wonderful meeting with a not-for-profit organisation, and this particular not-for-profit organisation helps other not-for-profit organisations bring funding to them so they can do, some amazing work. And what they shared with me, I nearly fell off my chair, but a part of me thought, HR people need to know this. We all need to just be reminded about technology. So a lot of the time what I'm hearing around technology is, it's not the same as face-to-face, and I'm not saying it is the same as face-to-face, but the rhetoric around it is you need to be face-to-face, you need to be in the room, there's nothing like it, there's nothing different to it. Now, I agree that it's neither one or the other, but I don't think the language of being virtual needs to be all that disconnected. And when this lady was talking to me, she literally blew me away. And what she spoke to me about was when COVID hit, a lot of the areas that they put together for not-for-profits is really to help them raise money. And they usually do that in a room with high net worth individuals or very senior people that come together, and they help, raise money and pitch and raise money. What she found was when COVID hit, they couldn't do it face-to-face anymore. You couldn't get one person up a lift, and then when they're up the lift, you couldn't have more than 3 people in a room and what have you. So they moved to virtual. And when they moved to virtual, she couldn't believe what she was finding. She found that they raised in all the areas that they have done 25% more fundraising for any organisation that came. and 35% increase in the amount of people that attended the actual area. And she said the feeling online was like nothing she had felt before. And the presenters that usually pitch for the not-for-profits, usually when you're in a room, you're taught to own the room, try to get eye contact, move your arms around, move and work the stage, but you don't get much back from the people because they don't want to interrupt your pitch. They know you're doing great work and they just want you to, get to the end of it so that you can do what you need to do. But when you're online, these messages start popping up and the person speaking is reading them. Your organization's amazing. I have a brother with that particular, and so the feeling in the room shifts. So more people are bidding, even if it's less amounts. Now, the reason why I'm sharing the story is from a HR perspective, we will be the ones that lead. How do you connect people to your values? How do you connect people ethically and morally? And the people that you hire, your greater purpose and your mission will become far more important than the day-to-day processes that you may put in place. Those processes may still sit in HR. They might move to another department that's not known today.
Might be technology.
It might be technology, it might be fine. I mean, we don't know, but the point is more, the HR professional has a very particular and different view of the organisation and of people. And we are the ones, I think, with the strongest skill sets that can bring that piece together, balancing face-to-face with the virtual world.
And I think even when we think about it from a professional services type business, the compliance side is the stuff that can be automated. It's the stuff that you can use artificial intelligence. So when I think of, areas that we have had to invest a lot in terms of remuneration and those sorts of things, there's a lot of skill set and capability that goes into that, and I still think it will be needed. But I think there'll be more and more in those spaces that you can use artificial intelligence and use really clever technology to help you with that. The areas where it's the areas that I see continuing to grow in need, and we're already seeing those trends, are the areas that are around connecting people and having better conversations. So change management, organisational development, those more partnership advisory type skill sets, I think will be even more important in the new world.
I totally agree, Janine. And that advisory skill set where you can solve problems and work out best ways forward, there really won't be much automation for that. And where you will automate, HR need to be very good at making sure the checks that you've got in place can predict behaviour. And I'll give you an example, but it's a very sad example, so I'm in my head.
Well, you're going to have to go.
Now I'm going to have to go there. We were listening to Simon Sinek.
Yes.
And he was sharing a story around, I don't know if it was the Army or Navy, the Navy, where once upon a time you would fill out a form to change your next of kin on your pension form or your superannuation form. Now, when you were people with people, when you went to change your next of kin, you'd have to give it to your line manager. And at that point, your line manager would go, hey, what's this about? What's going on here? But now things are so automated. What happened is things are now just going straight through.
And you just go online.
You change it, there's no discussion. And unfortunately, what they started to find is as people were filling this out, there was an incidence of
there was an increase in suicide rate.
I couldn't even say it myself.
So basically, in the past, when people were putting the form in, suicide rates were at whatever percentage of those people who had changed their next of kin. However, when they automated the process and there was no longer any need to have an interaction, the rates of suicide increased of those people who had gone and changed their next of kin details. And what they understood from that was essentially the mere act that you had to hand a form in to your manager or your leader, the mere fact of that engaged in a discussion and was therefore likely to help be that circuit breaker that meant that there was an understanding of, hey, something's going on here, and how are you and what's going on.
Yes.
So it's understanding from what you're saying how when you do create automation, when you do create changes that might remove the human element, what is there an outcome that occurs that is unexpected?
Yes.
Because I don't think anybody would have predicted
No
or
way.
even known that the mere act of handing a form in was actually saving people's lives.
Yes.
When you think about it.
So that connectivity and the values and the ethics become so much more. And anytime you go to automate, we just say, don't just automate. You need to always keep the human element there, and you just always making sure that, you know, you are looking after people and you are moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that's there are those elements where when you see the role of HR in the future, it is understanding data. There's a huge skill.
It is understanding data.
Drawing insights.
I don't like saying that because data is like, oh, but for those of us that are great.
It might be, Marianne, that it's not you understanding.
Yes, someone in the team will understand the data.
Somebody needs to understand the data and draw the insights.
Yeah.
And then there needs to be a skill set and understanding what do you do with those insights. And I see that being one of those, we're already seeing it, but I still see a lot in organisations where there are a lot of HR processes that exist because they've existed for 10 years, and over time we've just slightly tweaked and changed them, and we've never sat down, or we have rarely sat down and said, is this 5-page form actually driving the outcome we wanted that 5-page form to drive?
Yeah.
Those sorts of discussions.
And I think what I'm taking from this great discussion is that there's lots of opportunity. There will be lots of learnings, as in the case with the Navy. There will be reliance on data. There will need to be people who understand the data, and I think the criticality in the vision, in the values, becomes even more important, because you will lean on those in your businesses far more than you would have in the past when you're not necessarily connected in the same way. And it sounds like that is a big role for HR, and the capabilities you look for in HR professionals might be slightly different than where they were in the past, as you told with your story on how they've evolved over time, which is quite exciting to think that that's the role that HR could play in the future.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be, there's room for creativity. I don't think anyone has a silver bullet in terms of what is the best way to keep people connected.
Yeah,
as we go forward.
And I think there's huge opportunity in recognizing how your whole approach to talent can shift when you think about the fact that it doesn't matter if you live in Australia or
Vancouver
or wherever.
Italy,
Vanessa, you want to go home, that's fine. You know, we'll work on a shift basis. You know, there's a whole host of other elements that will come into play. And being able to operate in that very complex world will be a really important capability within HR.
And I might just say
go.
something else, and this is a little bit more operational, but some of the conversations that we're having is around the workplace. And so the mindset shift of why do we come to the workplace needs to be happening right now, because people are looking for different things now when we're coming in.
Yeah. Oh, it's fascinating. We have this whole discussion for us. You know, BDO. What are we going to do? What's our positioning going to be next year? What's flexibility going to look like here? And we often talk about, well, this has been an amazing experiment for the last 9 months. We've had dramatic shift in expectations of people, and we have to take the lessons from that. But it's easy to just fall back into creating the past again.
Mm-hmm.
You know, okay, we've just had an announcement from the government that early in December the requirement to work from home if you can will be lifted. Now, how many organisations will now go out and go, great, everybody come back.
Just come back in. And what they don't realise is people's mindsets have shifted. Hang on, I'm a lot more conscious about the time I spend on the road now, and to me it's a waste of time. Or actually, I'm a lot more conscious about my health, and I want to manage where I go and who I see. So one of the things Vanessa was talking about, I know earlier this morning before the webinar, was why do we come to work? What's the workplace? The discussions around, you come to work to collaborate and this is the space we have for you. Or you come to work to do really critical thinking and we produce spaces for you.
Yeah.
So really thinking about the behaviours you're trying to build in your organisation and how they're aligned to your values and what you're trying to do for your organisations, your customers, your clients, I think just fuels it. See, that's a digestible discussion as opposed to flinging back to where we were. was like, yep, we get it. Things are going to shift. Yep, some of us want to come in. That's great. Why do we come in now? What is it we do?
And actually, you know, the companies that are ahead of this ever so slightly than the rest of us, like Shopify, for example, the e-commerce platform, they have a team, a culture design team. And what they do, that is exactly their responsibility. And they had it before, but the mandate has changed because that business has gone digital by default until the new year. So everyone is working from home, and their ability to instill the values, to help people understand the values and apply them to make decisions in their day-to-day is a challenging task for them, and to rethink how people come together in the physical space. And that may require financial investment to redesign what your current footprint is.
See, I love that discussion. And even if it is financial investment to redesign, what you're doing is you're building on your culture and your platform. You're being clear with people in terms of what it is you expect.
And it's exciting for people.
It's exciting, and it moves it away from the past and who's coming in and who's not, which is not helpful moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect segue, as you say, Vanessa, because somebody flipped the slides. We could talk about this all day. But I think, you know, starting to think about, so what are those HR operational models of the future going to look like is really interesting. Now, before we get into it, you know, when we started to talk about this, we talked about, well, do we bring to the table the best, you know, 5 best practice operating models that, you know, we're seeing organizations go to. And I think, you know, having lived through a myriad of different HR operating models, my strong feeling, and I'll be interested in your thoughts, is I don't feel like it is appropriate to sit down and say, this is best practice, this is where you should go.
I agree.
I think it's different for every business. And I think you know, I think that the most disconnecting moments in my life have been when, you know, big consultants have sat down and said, right, this is the direction for all of this industry from a HR perspective. Here's the operating model of the future, all get behind it. When I could see holes that you could drive a truck through in terms of how that was actually going to work for us in our business. And to kind of go on that journey going, right, well, they're telling me this is best practice, this is where I need to go, I think is really disconnecting. And I don't think it actually gets you to the outcomes that you need. What I do think gets you to the outcomes that you need is understanding your business, your industry, your market, your people, and your strategy, and then making sure that you're very deliberate in designing an operating model that supports your journey, and not necessarily going out and saying, well, here's what the trends are, let's apply that trend into our business, even if it actually doesn't make sense. So for some businesses, I think that means business partnering and building leadership capability through that kind of model will work. For other businesses, I think a culture design team sounds like an amazing, amazing way of positioning how they're going to bring to life that vision. So you're not going to see now 5 slides of here's the 5 best operating models, but we will talk through some of the elements of operating models.
Yeah, and these are our ideas based on what we've seen, based on what we've experienced. And I love how you contextualize it, Janine, because it's not saying go and take these 4 elements and put them in your business immediately, get your executive team together. That's not at all. This is more inspiration and for you to consider, and ultimately to come back to see if the elements of your model is your business pointing in the same direction. And are you investing the time and effort to plan for the future, and how you're going to, your HR team will play maybe a different role in connecting people to your values and your purpose.
Yeah.
So we've spent a lot of time, I think most of our conversation has been around this, the ability for the HR professional to, you know, to share the vision, share and help people understand the values, and to drive connectivity through the business. So Zanine, did you want to add anything else that we've missed?
The only thing I would say on that I would add on this is really this, a lot of this does come back to the culture that you create. And I think one of the conversations we often have is you need to have space, and you need to have the vision of what the deliberate culture is that you want to create. Because we do have a culture, every business has it, but it will happen just by all of the decisions that you make on a daily basis. And if you want to create a culture shift, if you want to own the culture that you're creating in your organisation, you do need to have a vision for it. And it's not a statement on the wall. It's not a simple thing to do, but you do need to start to think about a very deliberate design for how you're going to bring that culture to life. So I think having that skill set and capability in HR teams to understand how all of the different elements of what you do and what you bring to life shift and create that culture, I think is really important. And what we do in HR does have a massive impact. You know, the conversations you have with managers around creating culture, the processes you put in place in terms of what you say is important in terms of managing people is important in creating culture, and it should be a capability that organisations have in some way, shape or form.
I agree. I totally agree, Janine. And defining the values, defining the vision, defining the connectivity you want to see is absolutely one of the first steps you need to do to be able to do all of that. And what's beautiful about this is it's about your business. It's not about what Joe Blogs is doing down the street. It's not about what other organizations, it's about you and your business and where you want to drive it. And the people you want to attract will be the people that align to that very thing. So your time invested in making that clear will be second to none. Yes, well spent.
Love that. Okay, the next idea or concept is around people partners or HRBPs or business partners, just partners. Where do we think this role could end up? Is there a place for it in the future? What does it look like?
Look, this is where I started in HR, and I had a 20-year career as in partnership roles in different ways. I think there is absolutely a place for a partnership role, depending on the business and depending on what you're trying to drive. I think that exactly what that role looks like, though, may change over time. I've been in business partnering roles that were quite operational, and I've been in business partnering roles that were very strategic and really a very strong coaching role. So I think the value in the partnership is what's really important, and recognising that having connectivity and having a relationship can help you to lift capability in an organisation far more effectively than some other more distant roles. I don't know if that's the terminology, but I think some of the most satisfying relationships I ever developed in the corporate world were the general managers and MDs that I business partnered with, and being able to help them shift their organisation and create change, and shift themselves and create change. So I think there is a role, but I think it will shift and morph over time.
I agree. I think it will shift and morph over time, and depending on what your organisation needs. So if you do have 10,000 staff that are scattered around, or you're on a virtual platform or you're digital, and you need to really drive your values and your vision, the skill sets that you find in people partners or
HR
business partners are actually the perfect skill set to help you lean into more of that values discussion. You can use the influencing, the understanding, the driving to help shape where you can go and help your leaders define where they need to be.
Yeah, it's interesting. We work with quite a few organisations, and one we worked on helping define their business, their HR operating model recently, and people partners was actually a really important element of that. Now they're trialling it, so they're not going in with we're going to have 15 people partners across the business, but they're going in and saying we have leaders in our business that we know have a way to go in developing their maturity around managing people more effectively, and we think that the business partner or the people partner role will play a strong role in helping them think through things proactively and helping them become more strategic in this thinking. So we'll see if that actually has the impact that we think it will have in that environment. But that's not going to be the same for another environment where you have really mature leaders who have a lot of capability in this space. The people partner role might look very different then.
Yeah.
Right, so it will depend on the organization's maturity.
Yeah.
And in some organizations, you may need to lean on people partners to build the capability in leaders, because it's a tall order to expect leaders to manage teams who've been promoted based on their technical ability, and then, to not have that support from someone that can help them build, or help them see where their blind spots are. So I think in many organizations, there will need to be that capability uplift in some way, and whether that's something that's virtual or whether that needs to happen through HR professionals, we'll have to see, I suppose.
Yes.
I think what I like about the partner concept is that it's about meeting someone where they're at and helping work with them to lift, as opposed to pushing something out and saying this is where we're at in the business. It's very much bringing people along on that journey in however that, in whatever way that looks.
Yeah.
Okay, the third idea we wanted to share with you was I think there will be a continued need for deep knowledge and specialist skills.
Yeah.
Depending on the size of your organization, you may have those in-house, or you may access them externally if you don't have the capabilities with you. Things like remuneration, paying people what they are meant to be paid, and having confidence and comfort that you're doing the right thing, learning and organizational development. These are very specialist skills that you need to lean on, and it's not realistic to think one person or one technology solution can provide all the answers to fill those gaps.
I think the only thing on that is I do think we'll see a shift to where and it may be that you do still have all of those different skill sets, but I do think that some skill sets will become more and more sought after. And like change management we see is more and more sought after, and it's because we know just how impactful it is to have someone thinking through all of those elements of who you're trying to impact, how you're impacting them, and bringing them along a change journey. Whereas I think if we, and I think organisational development skill sets, as an example as well, will also be the kinds of skill sets that we see come into play more and more within organisations, because it is a really specialist skill set, and you might develop it through being a generalist, but often the people that I talk to who are really great in that space have a background in organisational psychology and those sorts of things. They bring a different thinking and capability to the table.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Other areas such as OD.
That's what I just said.
At least we're alive. Hey.
Okay,
Okay, let's go to the fourth. And Janine, you talked about this one a bit earlier, and it's the automation and digitization of operational and HR. And I would even argue that it goes beyond HR. When you think about operations of a business, IT, legal, human resources, all these enabling functions that allow, teams and businesses to do their work more efficiently may come together in a seamless way. So you're going to one place, to help you get what you need, regardless of what that is, if it's IT or HR, because there's been good progress and evolution in terms of operational HR, but I think it goes beyond. It's more about integration horizontally across the business in some of these functions.
Yeah.
And I think some of what we talked about before is, there's still a way to go. Like we still work with a lot of organisations who have fairly unsophisticated HR systems. I think sometimes the cost of getting some of these big HR systems in is really prohibitive for large organisations. So we're seeing more and more interesting software coming to the market that's more nimble and sort of tailored to smaller and medium-sized organisations. So that's great. But I think the next step is there's so much data, there's so much information that we have on our people, and I don't necessarily see the same level of sophistication across organisations in terms of what we do with that data. So one thing is, from an operational HR perspective, is you get people on board, you get them paid, you exit them. All of that stuff needs to happen, and it needs to happen efficiently and effectively. But then there's another level of all of this information that we have about our people. How do we actually take insight from that and drive some of the work that we're doing around vision and values and connectivity? So I see what might happen is the type of skill set and capability that we have dealing in that operational HR space may actually shift to not so much doing the do that we used to do back in our first HR jobs, where I'd be sitting there data entering and literally checking off every field in the system and then having my fights with payroll as to whether or not I got it wrong or they got it wrong. So that stuff goes, but the ability to draw insight from the information that we have and to help feed that into the decision-making, capabilities within the organisation, I think become more and more important.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. I think these are really topical, and I think without any certainty, we'll have to see how they come to life and what the actual evolution looks like on some of these concepts. But I hope it's given our listeners something to think about as, you know, they kind of reflect on their operating models and specifically around their HR teams and the capabilities and the skills. Do you have something to add, Marianne?
You know what I was thinking?
Yeah.
Of all the different departments, HR has evolved, I think, the most, and in such a short amount of time. What you're asked from a HR perspective 20 years ago and what you're asked for now is so much broader, so much bigger. You could literally walk into any organisation and they will expect something different from that HR person. And so the skill set of the HR person, I think, is quite unique and one that can continue to evolve. So all I want to say to everyone that's listening that's in HR is no matter where the world takes us or the environment or whatever it may be, you and your peers before, you've actually shown we've grown the most, we've moved the most, and it's because we stay connected to not only the business but the people. So we can shape what it actually looks like as it moves forward.
Yeah, and I think the most powerful thing to think around as we go through and wrap up this is there's a couple of elements. One, when we're talking about operating models, it's not about getting complicated. It's not about, you know, boiling the ocean, but it is about saying, what is our role in HR and how are we aligning to the future strategy and direction of the business, and making sure that in everything that we do, in everything that we implement, in every shift that we make, that we're building towards whatever that target is. And I think the other thing to really think about as we go through that, process is that we need to be thinking about the outcomes that we drive with every investment that we make in shifting these things, because we do have a big impact on organisations, whether or not it's always recognised or not.
Yeah.
Even if it's that people bitch and moan about certain things that are being implemented, it's an impact. And I think really great HR models and really great HR operators will be those people and those businesses that are thinking about what's the intent of what we're trying to achieve through this, and how do we make sure that we bring it to life.
I love that. I feel inspired.
Awesome.
Great way to end the year, ladies.
All right, so just wrapping up today, we would love to connect with you. If you have questions on anything we talked about today, please feel free to reach out. All of these details will come out to you. If you haven't sat through our webinars before and you're thinking this is actually quite an interesting one, we have a whole 2 years worth of webinars now in our library that you can go back and have a look at. We're going to take some time over the Christmas New Year period, maybe not Christmas, maybe after New Year, to really think about where do we go with these webinars for next year. And I think you'll see from BDO's perspective, you'll see a whole lot more topics coming into this space, and maybe a few more voices, not just the Sydney People Advisory team. So stay tuned for some of those communications in the early new year. But thank you for those of you who've tuned in regularly. And have a great Christmas and a happy New Year. How weird does that sound to be saying?
Bring on 2021.
Here we go.
Thanks
Thanks everyone.